Lawmakers in the state of Tennessee have abandoned their plans to propose and pass legislation that would outlaw child marriages in their state. You heard that correctly. Child marriages occur not only in Tennessee, in the United States, but it's particularly bad in Tennessee. In fact, a recent investigation found that three 10-year-old girls had been married to men ages 24 to 31, and an 11-year-old boy who had been married to a 27-year-old woman. So understandably, lawmakers in the state realized that there was an issue here. Now, there are laws against child marriages, but there are all sorts of loopholes that people were taking advantage of. So for instance, a judge could intervene and allow underage people to get married. Parents could get involved and say that they allow their 10-year-old daughter to marry a man who's in his 30s. And so they wanted to close these loopholes. But then another conservative organization gets involved and they stop it because they were worried that this legislation, if it had passed into law, would do away with their efforts, or at least put their efforts to outlaw gay marriage in jeopardy. So in their view, gay marriage is much worse than 10-year-olds marrying people in their 30s. Let me give you more details. Now in 2016, 42 men and 166 women under the age of 18 were married in the state. State law is riddled with loopholes that essentially allow minors of any age to marry. Now, two Democrats in the state legislature set out to close the loopholes and set 18 without exceptions and without loopholes as the required age for anyone to obtain a marriage license. And this is where things start to get pretty shady. So House Majority Leader Glenn Casada was convinced to send the bill to summer study in the House Civil Justice Subcommittee after an email from attorney David Fowler, a former state senator. Now, David Fowler is the individual who wants to outlaw same-sex marriage in the state of Tennessee. And he's the one who emailed the House Majority Leader in Tennessee, and convinced him, how about we push this bill into this summer study session, which essentially kills the bill.
It's like a gap year. Right. It takes a year to go find itself,
Yeah, so because of Wolfpack, I know all about how they kill bills. And the number one way is, we will consider it later, which means we're done with it. We're not considering it. So summer study means we killed the bill, it's done.
Exactly. So what is Fowler's reasoning? What is his legal theory behind killing this bill? And why would that bill negatively impact his efforts to outlaw same-sex marriage? Fowler's email said he is preparing a lawsuit to counter the US Supreme Court's decision to legalize same-sex marriage. He's arguing that the Supreme Court's ruling essentially nullified all Tennessee marriage licenses when it opened the spectrum of legal marriage beyond just between a man and a woman. He says that if Tennessee were to ban child marriages by modifying state marriage law, lawmakers would be acknowledging the existence of same-sex marriage. If the legislature were to update its marriage laws, it would thereby acknowledge the validity of those marriage laws in the post-gay marriage legalization era, right? Fowler's theory is that the legislature would never pass a marriage law if it required the recognition of same-sex couples' marriages would fall apart. So look, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not privy to the laws, and so I feel uncomfortable commenting on that, like whether or not that legal theory is accurate. But what I will say, and this is something that is known, is that they genuinely think same-sex marriage is worse than kids getting pressured and forced into marriage, which is what's happening here. 10-year-old girls do not have the ability to consent to marrying some 31-year-old dude.
Listen, some people believe in their heart of hearts and through some of their religious convictions that marriage is simply the union of one man and one child.
Yeah, and by the way, though, that is literal, and it is. There's a lot of examples in the Bible, so they're not that far off. Which gets me to my point that some might consider controversial. Yeah, they care more about the issue of gay rights and taking away gay rights, and that's a good way of framing it, Anna. But I actually think that they don't mind child marriage. They think it's part of their culture. So that is a conservative thing. Now, it doesn't. I don't want anybody to get me wrong. I'm not saying every conservative in the country and so conservative from California thinks, oh, it's awesome for 10-year-olds to get married to 30-year-olds. No, but I'm saying there are some people in Tennessee, Kentucky, where this is being discussed, both states. that got married when they were 13, that had a tradition and a culture of getting married really, really young. And that was one that was intertwined with their religious views in the world. So I think they just flat out don't want to get rid of the law.
What is one of the common smears that we heard from the right wing when it came to the prohibition of same-sex marriage? What was a common smear that gay people had to deal with?
Oh, that they were going to go after the kids.
That they were going to be pedophiles, that they're disgusting. No, you're the pedophiles. You guys are the ones who are supporting the marriage of a 10-year-old to a 31-year-old. It's disgusting. They're the real pedophiles. Another classic case of projection.
And look, it's not an accident and not just political that there was a lot of people in Alabama that defended Roy Moore. And if you remember some of the defenses that we quoted from Republican officials in the state of Alabama, it was a lot of, what's the big deal? And they're like, what, you didn't do that, right? And so, again, not all conservatives, and I don't say that because I'm politically correct, I'll call all conservatives all sorts of names, right? But there is some subset of conservatives, especially in that region of the country, who thinks, what's the big deal? And if I want that, that should be part of my privilege. And Anna, you're right, I hadn't thought about it that way. And then what do? They say, well, gay people are interested in young kids.
So here's the thing about statutory rape means that someone under 16 can't give consent. So if you're married to someone who's 10 years old, that's by just like definition of law, rape, right? So that's why I don't understand.
It's not that they can't give consent, the parents give consent. So
but you can't give consent for your kid to have sex.
You can give consent for your kid to enter into marriage, and that is the law in a lot of these places.
But I thought that was after you were of age of consent for sex, but too young for marriage.
No, that's the insane part here. Jimmy is, in essence, right. Eileen Rechenwald, the executive director for the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs, because Kentucky was also considering a bill to end the loopholes to end child marriage in Kentucky, and it also got held up by right-wing interests. They claim for other reasons, we can get into that in a second. I don't believe them. Anyway, Eileen Rechenwald, who wants to combat this, said, quote, "This is legalized rape of children." Because in those cases, if you're a 31-year-old guy and you slept with a 10-year-old in the state of Tennessee, you would go to prison for probably decades, as you should. But if you're a 31-year-old who got the permission of her parents to marry her and then had sex with her, that would be perfectly legal.
It's insane.
And by the way, not like that's the law today in Tennessee.
And they again killed the bill that would do away with the loopholes to protect these kids. You know,
some of them are 3-day waiting periods before having a wedding. You've planned a wedding. I've planned a wedding. 3 days? Are you kidding me? We need to get these children married now before it stops being insert something disgusting there. Like what is the motivation to be like within 72 hours I might change my mind? We need to get this kid married now.
It's crazy. And by the way, if you look at the US as a whole, because you're right, Brett, there are many other states who have certain loopholes like this on the books. Between 2000 and 2015, at least 207,468 minors were married in the United States.
87% are girls, 1/3 were 16 or under, 1% were under 15, 14% married other minors, sure, 85% married people who are 23 and younger. Just the youngest children to marry were 3 10-year-old girls in Tennessee in 2001 who were married to men ages 24, 25, and 31. This is all from a Frontline report. The youngest groom was an 11-year-old who married a 27-year-old. One of the oldest people to marry a children was a 74-year-old in Alabama. His bride was 14.
What are you doing?
What did I tell you about Alabama conservatives who want to marry 14-year-olds? I didn't know that story, and there it is.
The state raised the age to 16 afterwards. So
and my point about culture. So in Kentucky, the right-wing group who's trying to defeat this similar legislation says, no, we're just looking out for parental rights. You know, in case the parent wants to. Anyway, so and they have a whole bunch of excuses. I don't believe them. I think that the conservative idea is, come on, you liberals are even trying to change this. Okay, you could prove me otherwise, by the way, by actually getting it passed in these states and ending what is in essence, as Jimmy pointed out and the experts point out, legalized child rape, okay? But they're not doing it and they're fighting it. And in that Kentucky case, one of the women who is spearheading the process was married off when she was 16 to a predator who had molested her at the age of 14 and continued to molest her, and her parents pressured her to marry him. By the way, this is something that happens sometimes I've used this example often, in Central Asia. There's the nomadic cultures that go and they used to kidnap women, and because they were nomads and they do raids, and they still have that tradition. Some, not all, but some of them still kidnap women, rape them, and then the woman's parents come over and say, don't cause us embarrassment, and so just marry your rapist, okay? And we go, oh my God, look at these Central Asian guys, look at these Muslim fundamentalists, look at these guys, that guys. Meanwhile, right here in Tennessee and Kentucky, you know what happened in that case in Kentucky? The woman who'd been abused since the age of 14, her mom came over and convinced her to marry her molester. And one of her reasons was, what's the big deal? I got married at 13. Because there is a certain subset of culture there that is used to that kind of being marriage, partly because, hey, when you hit puberty, the Bible instructs us it's time for you to have kids, and you can't have it outside of marriage, so up and at 'em.
So this is what they mean when they talk about sanctity of marriage.
If you become a member of the Young Turks, you'll be saying,
you know, I'm like a smart person.
So do it right now, tytnetwork.com/join. Get the whole Young Turks show every day.